Thank you very much to Carlo and Juliana for inviting me here to actually kickstart this panel discussion on AI and social policy. As Carlo very rightly pointed out, actually what I do work largely is on the employment issues of the digital angle, and we are actually working on a huge digital economy report there. And social policies is one of the angles that we actually look at. And for us, AI is pretty key in the entire process, whether you look at the question of employment or working conditions or providing welfare services to the workers. So talking about what I'm going to do is basically lay down the AI in government services across the globe, give you some examples of what the good practices or what the attempts have been, which can be helpful for a number of sectors, then sort of point out also some of the drawbacks that are there, and then discuss a bit about the regulatory issues, and then I'll leave it for the next presentations to go quite a bit in detail in each of these cases. So to begin with, how do we actually define artificial intelligence? I think there are a number of definitions that are existing. So one of them, which is much more comfortable for us to actually pick on, and for our research purposes, we use the European Commission's Joint Research Centre's definition, which refers to machines or agents that are capable of observing the environment, learning, and based on the knowledge and experience gained, taking intelligent actions or proposing decisions. Now, if you look at the literature, there's absolutely no agreed definition actually that exists. And at the moment, what you actually see by the end of it, when you try digging quite a bit deep, you find that, well, it's machine learning techniques that are actually used. And then we went and looked up at some of the other labs that are looking at this entire question. And you have the Fujitsu laboratories that are existing, which basically gets down to saying, and this is the 5 principles that are there, the minute you touch on AI, basically talking about reasoning, linguistics, learning, perception, and problem solving. Now, one of the arguments that comes up is that these systems have more advantages more than the human, largely because they have the ability to actually perform tasks that are very repetitive. They can deal with large quantities of data, which the humans cannot actually deal with. They can operate in very dangerous environments, and information does not have to be in a human-readable form. Now, this is quite interesting in a way, but the more you get into the nitty-gritties of it, you figure out probably this is not so true, and you do find that humans are part of this loop in the entire AI building. Now, there are a number of benefits that are very clearly there for the public sector to actually use AI. And that's much more in terms of improving efficiency, improving their capability of providing services. And Hela Mayer actually tries putting down a number of categories or categorizations, saying how the resource allocation within the government services could be actually better utilized. And sometimes when there are not enough capabilities that are there within the system, how AI can actually help in improving quite a bit of systems. Now, if you really look at it, many of the AI case studies that you see for citizen services, they actually fall under 5 major categories. They fall under categories saying answering questions, filling out and searching documents, routing requests, translation, and drafting documents. And there are examples across the globe, whether you look at New York, you look at Mexico, or you look at India, or you look at London, or you look at other countries in Africa or Asia, where you find that many of the government departments, especially the welfare departments, actually utilize many of this information to actually help speed up the entire processes. So AI can be very helpful. Now, these applications could actually make the government more efficient while freeing up the time for employees to build up better relationships with citizens. But actually, despite the clear opportunities that exist, there are very clear systemic problems that are there around the whole questions of service delivery, around the questions of privacy, ethics of not being able to implement some of these mechanisms in a very thoughtful and a successful way. And that's where actually the question comes up saying, okay, AI is very good, it could be utilized, but is there a capability and the capacity within the government departments to actually take this up in the provision of the welfare services? So AI can reduce very clearly administrative burdens, help resolve resource allocation problems, and take on very clearly significant complex tasks and applications. But the issue then comes out is that, are we really hyping around these modern tools? And there actually what Carlo showed was quite interesting in the sense that the issue of automation is not new. We've been talking in different phases over the past at least 50 years, the phases of the 30s, the phase of 50s and the 60s, and then the phase of the 80s. So this has been an issue that's been coming up, but to what extent are we actually ready to today utilize AI or adopt AI completely within the systems and actually go by? And that's where the question comes. So the issue is this benefit, surely in the inevitable future that we have, to make technological investments to keep pace with it, and how to engage with the citizens and to provide these services. But are we there yet is a larger question that we want to ask. So if you look at some of the examples that actually exist, there are some very good ones. There are two that actually pertain, which have been working very successfully. One is that of the Singapore government for the whole of government AI in action, which is a kind of an apex system that they have sort of developed. A similar system, slightly modified, is what you actually see coming up in Estonia today, which has also gone quite digital, using quite a bit of AI. Now, the apex system of Singapore, what it basically does, it establishes a common application program interface, that is the APIs, which allows different public agencies, that is the government agencies, to share data and services with other agencies and also with private entities. Now, what does this do? It basically simplifies the communication protocol between the different government departments, and they don't need to collect the data on individuals or citizens each time. So it simplifies a bit of the process by centralizing this, and APIs actually allow information communication to take place across different departments, different systems, and to basically expedite and improve the efficiency. Now, one of the pilot projects that you have as part of the APEX is the MyInfo, which was developed to share basic citizen data, which actually hosts the agency database, and it allows banks to actually use the citizens' information to open up bank accounts. Now, the issue that comes up is, okay, this data is there. How do you actually utilize it? And what data could be utilized becomes a question, and what is the process and what purpose becomes very key. Now, it actually addresses one of the biggest systemic challenges facing governments in the pre-era of machine-to-machine learning and AI. That is, it allows the data and system interoperability to actually take place and to improve efficiency. The second AI in action that is, and this has been there quite a bit in the private sector, and it is coming up a bit more in the public sector, and this is the National Health Services in the UK. Now, very clearly, it's been utilized. What the National Health Services in the UK has been doing is, at the Addenbrooke Hospital in Cambridge, they've been using the Microsoft's Inner Eye system to automatically process scans of patients with prostate cancer. Now, how AI helps within this process is it actually detects it and tries to warn the system so that it helps the doctors in trying to identify the stages, and then you could have some sort of a predictive medicament that could be done. So there's a very good positive way of actually utilizing this and investigating the process and taking remedial measures using the AI. And I think the private sector, especially in US and Japan, have been using this much more effectively than what you see in the government services, but it's been picking up. That's another good example. The third example I want to show is from India, which is the Delhi Traffic Police, which has been using the AI in traffic. It is for the intelligence traffic management system. I don't know how many of you actually cover the news on India, especially Delhi. You see that the pollution levels in Delhi are super high, and traffic is one of them, if not the most important one. So there you have huge health issues, especially for the policemen who actually, or the traffic police, which actually handles this traffic. So what they did was they worked on a radar-based monitoring with the help of AI, and they analyzed the traffic patterns, the volumes, the number of vehicles, and collected them on the cloud, which is further used to actually manage the traffic. Now, you do have the GPS systems which do work, but this is another system that they had come up with to actually track and to ensure that the traffic could be routed in a much better way. It also, other than this, it also contains features like the high-resolution CCTV cameras to capture commuters and motorists actually breaking the law. So you have, apart from the traffic flow, added advantage of trying to track them. Now, it has huge implications for the health of the people, but there are larger policy issues that have to be dealt with, but it does go about resolving, okay, how do we manage traffic in cities which are highly congested and where you have a huge roadblocks. The fourth one, which actually is quite an interesting one, and it affects especially the lives of many of the workers, especially which are agricultural-based economies, has been in the field of agriculture. And AI has been doing there's been a lot of interesting examples there that have proved to be successful, and that's where one of the areas where you could push it. So what happens is, in many of the countries which are largely agriculturally based, you have the agricultural departments having agriculture extension services in the rural areas, which actually sort of provide support to the farmers. So farming for the future is one of the experiments that has been going on in Karnataka, one of the states, which is a partnership between Microsoft, the state government of Karnataka, and there are lots of key local partners that are there, which includes both the non-governmental organization and the private sector. Now, what they do is they provide AI services to smallholder farmers to actually improve yields and also to ensure that there's a greater pricing control and help them with the entire marketing of the entire product. Now, this has actually helped or facilitated a number of farmers to actually improve their productivity and the yields, and also help in actually getting better prices and to be able to access markets much more easily. But there are certain downsides of it, and they're still working on it, because it does help in weather prediction, it does help in what the water usage has been. It helps in developing what the groundwater flow is, but there are still certain methods or parameters that are there that needs to be improvised. So while there are some good examples of the AI, there's also quite a bit of the dark side of AI. Now, it's not that the machines are taking over the world, but actually the humans work in the loop with the AI. And I think this is something that is not very much talked about, not very much told about. And I think the minute you get into the entire AI or algorithmic discussion, it almost looks sometimes that it's AI is determining. I think AI determines parts of it, but there is a human that is there within the decision-making process. Now, what we know, based at least on the research that we are doing, is that AI is still at the edge of this entire human-machine nexus, which is what we call it as a heteromation, because it's humans that actually help the machines to learn. So it's humans who are actually feeding in the data onto the machine learning aspects. And I don't think we have reached that stage where it could be completely automated or it could be completely AI determined. It depends much more on the kind of data that is actually put in. Now, this also has huge implications for data privacy. There are huge issues around exclusion. There are also concerns concerning transparency and accountability and ethics and security. And some of these issues will be also taken up by other colleagues later. Now, when you get into the question of AI in action, now there's very clearly examples that are there where I think these are quite well documented too within the literature, and it's coming up quite a bit, not only within the stream of employment, but it is also coming in the stream of welfare benefits and social policy. Now, there's a very interesting case that we actually tracked, which was the Centrelink, the Australia's Social Security Agency. This was quite widely covered, and even Guardian actually did a very good story on it. Now, what happened as a result of automation? The government decided to overhaul the system. They wanted to make it automated because it wanted to improve, simplify the administration, and improve efficiency. So the result of it is that the entire system is automated. You don't have humans behind it. And the automated system basically calls the welfare recipient and asks whether they are entitled to it or not. And if the welfare recipient actually does not respond to the call or does not respond to the mail, the payments are actually suspended. This was the actual case that happened. And it was estimated that about 72% of the benefit recipients actually did not get it. Now, what was the problem here that happened? You built in the automated system, you completely removed the human off the loop here. And if you had a human within it saying that, well, you're automating the system, but till the automation works, or you sort of design it in a way that you don't have just one call, but you have subsequent calls where you follow up the recipient and find out what is happening, you would not have this problem. Now, in this case, it was also told that number of recipients actually tried calling up the number, but they could not actually get any feedback mechanism. That's one of the biggest problems we see with the entire AI and algorithmic-based management today, which is true whether you're receiving welfare benefits or getting social protection or unemployment insurance or any of these, or whether you're working on a digital labor platform and you do the work and your work gets rejected and you have no clue why that has happened because there's no human in that particular loop which can actually try to address your problem. The second example I want to give is that of the policing and the bias. And I think this is a very well-known example, and this is something that's been, at least within the AI and the algorithmic bias, talked about quite a bit. And what's very interesting is this case was actually documented by the Royal United Service Institute for Defense and Security as a case saying that, well, there's a very clear need for us to look at this entire algorithmic bias that exists, even within the artificial intelligence that we talk about. This was a case of policing with England and Wales, and this is also something that you see in a number of other countries. It's been documented. This kind of a discrimination is actually documented quite well. There have been numerous benefits in policing, but also a number of risks that are there. Now, the police forces are actually adopting advanced analytical tools to derive insights from the data they collect to inform decision-making, resource prioritization, and risk assessment. Now, there is very clearly an unfair discrimination that happens on grounds of protected characteristics, real or apparent skewing of the decision-making process or outcomes and processes. Now, it's a combination of tools, it's a combination of people, and it's a combination of processes that are considered in this entire decision-making. Now, what happens is, if you have biases already existing, what AI basically does is it replicates that bias. So if you do not have, so it depends upon how the data has been collected, to what extent is there discrimination already in there, and it also depends upon what is the data that you're collecting. Is it a kind of a very biased sample that exists? So I think that becomes very crucial because that's what gets fed into the entire machine learning process, and that's what the AI determination is. Now, with regard to the entire algorithmic decision-making, now they are intelligent systems very clearly. They're very intelligent, but very clearly they can reinforce discrimination. The UN High-Level Commission, which sat 2018, 2019, they got out a report last year on the digital economy, digital cooperation in the global north and global south. And the report very clearly highlights the problems that are there with the algorithmic management and with AI and the usage of AI. It shows certain benefits, but clearly they go about saying also that intelligent systems can reinforce discrimination if the data that is fed within it is quite biased. So the discrimination can be unintentional, but it can also be intentional. When we get into the discussion on what is an unintentional discrimination that happens, now one of the indicators or one of the parameters that you can talk about is how do you define the target variable, or how do you actually classify labels? So, if you're talking about a particular region and you see that there are a lot of people in that particular, or even if you're talking about a government department, and observe that a lot of people coming from poor regions are taking a lot of time to come, then if you sort of start labeling them, saying that they always come late, now there's a sort of a bias that you are actually bringing in. So what becomes very important is what's the target variable that you use, and how do you actually classify many of the labels? And I think that, in a sense, you see very clear correlations that exist, and that in some can have a bias. The second is about the labeling of the training data. How do you actually label the data that you're collecting? That has a huge key parameter to play in. The third is, how do you collect the training data? Is there already an existing bias from the sample that you're actually picking it up that you feed into the machine learning process? So I think the entire issue of the selection of the data for training ML becomes very key and important. Then there are also other variables that are to be considered. One is the features options, and also the kind of proxies that you actually utilize for training the data. So I think all these factors have huge implications on the AI. Now, there are huge perceptions and trust that is also related to AI. A lot of citizens actually are very cautious about the kind of AI tools that are being utilized today. And there are some who are very hesitant. There are some who are very positive about AI actually predicting, having a very high predictive power with regard to what it can do. But I think it's very important to distinguish between how to distinguish policy on AI and policy with AI. I think we are not here to say that, well, that AI can do everything, but I think we should think about what are the sort of policies that we could develop where AI could help the humans in making certain decisions and not leave the entire process to AI. Now, the European Union, and there's a larger ethical issue with regard to it, and that's why the European Union has been exploring certain ethical guidelines and trustworthy AI with regard to artificial intelligence, that it should be lawful, complying with all applicable laws and regulations, it should be ethical, and it should be robust, both from a technical and a social perspective. And it should be with good intentions, and it should not have any unintentional harm. I think what's forgotten into the entire AI debate is it's always thought that, well, technology and data can actually lead us to the solutions that we want, and we actually miss the entire social, anthropological, or ethnographic part of what happens to the humans on the other end of the receiving end. And I think it's very important to integrate both the elements within the debate. And finally, to end with saying that one needs to very clearly regulate AI, even in the public sector. There are some very good approaches that are coming. One of them is that of the New Zealand Law Foundation, whose primary concern has been around the use of predictive algorithms in the public sector. And they relate to the whole question of accuracy, that it should be independent, there should be public oversight of the accuracy of the predictable models. And actually the debate that opens up here is much more, can we have more transparency? What is actually being used in this entire predictability model? Can we have a human control Can human be part of that loop so that they can be useful in the entire automation process and not being left to the technology? Transparency is a very important thing. Bias, fairness, and discrimination. I think we have to think of types of contexts where it is much more fair and where it's not discriminatory or biased. And finally, the entire issue of privacy. And I think there you need very clearly specific requirements to identify why are you actually collecting this personal information and protect the people with regard to either re-identification or de-identification and data portability and the right to be forgotten. So I think I'll stop with this. Thank you.